So, good evening, everyone, again. I'm going to start off with a Negro spiritual protest song that was sang quite a bit back in the 60s. And it's, I shall not be moved. I shall not be moved, just like a tree planted on the water. I shall not be moved. So I want to talk a little bit about equanimity, which is a big part of the Buddhist teachings, which I refer to as the fruit of our practice, the sense of not being moved or staying in our seat in the face of really crazy times. And even in the good times, some of us have allergic reactions to goodness, but most of us can also relate to this place that's just hard to stay and not be moved in the face of social distress. So equanimity is supporting us in knowing that place within ourselves. And it's a place that we touch into through the practice of mindfulness and being on the path of the Noble Eightfold Path. So back in, I think it was the 70s or the 80s when I was living in Santa Cruz, I had this dream. Martin Luther King's not the only one that has a dream. I had a dream. And the dream I had was sitting on this, I was in the middle of a very still lake, sitting on this flower, and I had this big round body. And this big round body had my face on it. And it was sitting peacefully in the middle of this lake, in this very serene setting with mountains and trees and birds. And it was just a horrendous storm occurring with lightning and thunder and, chiseled ice coming down out of the sky. And when I looked closely at the ice that was hitting me and the lightning, it had reflections of people's faces, part of their faces, kind of storming down and, just really attacking this body. But what I remember most was how serene I felt and how peaceful I felt and how at ease I felt. And it was so palpable. I was not in this practice at that time. I didn't know what that was about. And it would take many years later before I could recognize that was, an image of the Buddha sitting on a lotus flower having a peaceful war with Mara. My own Buddha nature being able to sit in the middle of a storm in the seat of wisdom and deal with all that life throws at you. So it was many years later before I got the meaning of that, and it was through this practice that I started touching into it in a very palpable and life-changing way. So I invite you to reflect for a minute on when have you experienced freedom in the midst of suffering, right in the middle of it. And what wisdom allowed this to happen? You think about that for a second. Because I think we've all had these brief moments of freedom that surprised us, that's opened our heart, enough to have us saying, I want some more of that. That's how I felt after waking up from that dream. It's like, I want some more of that, And I recognized something that was already there. And sometimes we run into things, we have a taste of it. It's homeopathic. A little is a lot. We touch into a vast, spacious place. And our life is kind of just simply and profoundly shifted as a result of it. I think this is what inclines and aspires us to be on a spiritual quest, to move towards something deeper and more vaster than what we have come and been conditioned to know about. So one way we maybe become attracted to this practice is through all of the images of the Buddha that we see, sitting peacefully on the lotus flower, you know, that inner stillness and serenity that's there, a sense of balance, integrity. And, you know, we recognize that because it's our own Buddha nature, and we lean towards that as a symbol of nobility, a confidence. And again, it's a recognition of something that we deeply know. So the Pali word for equanimity, and Pali is the language of the Buddha during his time. The Pali word is upekkha. And the meaning of it is to look over, to stand in the middle of all things. It's referred to as an evenness of mind, peace, ease, equipoise, balance. And I heard that it's referred to in India as to see with patience, to see with patience. I've heard it referred to as the crown jewel of the Buddhist practice, you know. And it's the ease that comes from understanding from the inside out that there are two kinds of suffering. There is suffering that leads to more suffering, and there's suffering that leads to the end of suffering. And the wiser we get, the more we can see with a sense of panoramic view. And we're not so fixated on our conditioning or the beliefs we have that's kind of holds us in a place of righteousness and narrow-mindedness. So equanimity is really referencing the ability to see with perspective, to see with wisdom. It's an inner strength that keeps us upright and strong in the core. And it supports the experience of well-being, confidence, and integrity. It's a state of non-agitation. I'm not there yet, but it's a state, it's the promise of our practice. This sense of non-resistance to what's here and now. It's kind of like, I can be with this. This is how it is right now. I can be with this. It's not pleasant. It's in fact horrible, but I can be with this. We can begin to see the elemental character of equanimity by looking at it from a sutta that the Buddha talked about when he was talking to his son about equanimity, his son Rahula. And he was describing it as a mountain. He had these elemental images as a mountain, as something that's solid and not disturbed by the seasons. This sense of inner stability. Sometimes we can feel it. These things are meant to be felt inside the body. You know? This kind of stature of the mountain. It's not disturbed by what season we're in. Another image was the image of space. All things can arise and pass away in space without being disturbed. Space is not disturbed by what arises and passes within it. Another image was the image of the ocean that can hold all things, can even just devour it, can disappear. Cities, nations, all kinds of things inside the spaciousness of the ocean. The equanimity has that kind of capacity. There's room for all things in the ocean. The ocean is not disturbed. And then another image was the image of a strong fire. The fire engulfs whatever's thrown into it. It's indiscriminate. It just melts it away. So this sense of awareness is not disturbed. Awareness of anger is not angry. Awareness of fear is not frightened. This sense of awareness is the wisdom piece of, I think, the teachings that are pointed to here. A spacious, vast mind that is not with war with what arises and passes away. This mind state of equanimity, when it's cultivated, it reduces suffering and it supports the experience of freedom. The ability to know freedom on the inside. So equanimity is in many discourses and teachings from the Buddha. It's very much, it repeats in different parts of the Buddhist lists and teachings, and it's usually at the end because it seems to represent a certain culminating factor. We kind of graduate into an experience of true equanimity because it comes with a sense of wisdom and practice, to know it from the inside out, to know it other than it being a concept or a great idea, to know it very directly. So it's part of the fourth foundation of mindfulness. It's part of the 7 factors of awakening. It's the 7th of the 7 factors, equanimity. It's also associated with wise effort because it speaks to a sense of balance. The balance of, joy and suffering is held by equanimity. The balance of clinging and indifference is held by equanimity. The changing winds of the 8 worldly winds is held by equanimity. Pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and shame, all held by equanimity, the constant changing winds. So equanimity is about knowing the energetic mind and experiences that we have and the ability to rest in it, to rest in the middle of it. It's the ability to say, this moment is like this, and it doesn't have to be different. It doesn't mean you're not working for change or some things to improve, but it means this moment right here and now, it's okay. Doesn't have to be different. I don't have to be at war with it. The Buddha describes a mind filled with equanimity as abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. And Toni Morrison, in her book Tar Baby, says it this way. She says, at some point in life, the world's beauty becomes enough. You don't need to photograph, paint, or even remember it. It is enough. No record of it needs to be kept, and you don't need somebody to share it with or tell it to. When this happens, this letting go, You let go because you can. And I think that's kind of in the neighborhood of equanimity, of not having strong preferences and being with the beauty or the indignity of what's right before you. The Brahma-vihara teachings is also a place where equanimity lives. It's the fourth of the Brahma-viharas. And the Brahma-viharas are teachings, are heart practices, 4 expressions of love that was taught. And it relates more to the inner programming that we have that supports us in being present without turning away. And the teachings of the Brahma-viharas are meant to remind us of the way things are and the truth of how things are. So in those teachings, you'll hear phrases like, I wish you happiness, but I cannot make your choices for you. It's really a practice that helps us with our, helps us work with our mind, especially in our relationships with our own mind and with people that are close to us, that are suffering, that are struggling. And it's really working this piece of non-clinging, or not assuming that the way we see things are the way they should be. You know, the arrogance of that can be present, especially with our kids and our partners. You know, we have this notion of, you know, if they just kind of got this together, life would be better. And, you know, sometimes it works. So statements in this practice of the Brahma-viharas of equanimity are, your happiness and unhappiness depends on your actions, not so much on my wishes for you. You see the respect in that, the non-interference in that, the balance of your way and this way, and I don't have to interfere with that or be disturbed by it. Whether I understand it or not, things are unfolding according to a lawful nature. May I accept this just as it is. You know, things like that are just being present to what is without insisting that it's otherwise. I came across a reading that really spoke to this beautifully. And I couldn't remember who the source was, but it goes like this. It is not our work to force someone's growth to our liking. It is the work of love to admire the beauty before you, to give people a sense of safety to unfold, to keep each other company when drowning in anguish, until the wave can balance out and our feelings can once again live in us. This kind of dignity in being okay with how one is and the way their life is unfolding and allowing it to have its own nature without interference is part of what this teaching's equanimity is in the Brahma-vihara practices, the heart practices. Equanimity is also part of concentration practice. And in the concentration practices, it's associated with the 4th jhana. It's associated with a deepening of stillness so that you can really see what the mind is capable of, the stillness that it's capable of. And we can actually begin to develop equanimity through concentration practices. We can do that through the concentration practices of the Brahma-viharas, or we can do that by beginning to give our attention to the breath and to the body, like the guided meditation we did a little earlier. There's 5 factors that support a deepening of concentration that supports an experience of equanimity. And the first 2 are about aiming the breath inside the body, aiming your attention there, and then sustaining it. Vitakka and vichara are the Pali words for that. And when you can steady your attention for a while in this stillness of the body and movement of the breath, you begin to feel the excitement or the electricity that's in the body. When the hindrances, when we're not giving, when the hindrances of mind is not taking our attention away, we can actually feel the energetic of our life without the story about it. It's referred to as piti, or joy and rapture. And sometimes that could be very exciting, and sometimes it can be agitating, I can remember a time in a concentration retreat I attended where I got still enough to become aware that the movement of the breath mimicked the asanas of yoga poses. The breath's rhythm was like downward facing dog, or, it was just amazing to see the movement of the breath actually had a rhythm and a story, and there was something alive about it that was very present. After this jubilance or joy settles and we can sustain our attention there for a while, we begin to cool down a bit and may begin to experience a state known as sukha, or bliss. Kind of a coolness and a settling and a soothing of experience, a sense of contentment and well-being. At this same concentration retreat, I remember having an experience where the thoughts were like on a big screen in the back of my head, but what was most pronounced in the front was a sense of stillness and ease and pure delight. It almost felt like chocolate. It felt like chocolate. It didn't taste like chocolate, but it felt like chocolate. Don't you want some of that? It was so amazing to see what's in stillness, because sometimes we have other words for stillness. We call it boredom, and we think something's wrong and not enough is happening, and we want to create a story so we can feel more alive. We're kind of allergic to it. We don't have a relationship with stillness and ease. It can be frightening initially. And you stay with that coolness and stability and ease. And then the 5th stage of this is a sense of one-pointedness, or a sense of sustained steadiness. You discover that you can actually hang out here, you can abide in this place of equanimity, unification, satisfaction, stillness of mind. You can rest despite what else is happening in your life. And when we touch into this place, it can feel very vast and timeless. And even when you come out of a meditation retreat, you take that with you, and it starts to inform how you view everything else. You can view other things in your life from this place of stillness and centeredness. And then there are equanimity is found in the 10 paramis, or the 10 perfections that the Buddhists teaches. It teaches about qualities of heart that are cultivated is particularly and lived by with the bodhisattva path, the path of walk. The bodhisattva is somebody like you and me that walks in the world committed to serving the world. And they commit their practice of liberation and waking up to the well-being of the world. And so they commit to practicing these 10 paramis of generosity, virtue, renunciation or letting go, wisdom, their energy, patience, truthfulness, a sense of resolve, loving kindness, and equanimity. These 10 perfections culminate in this sense of equanimity. So the bodhisattva, in my mind, is the way that the practice of equanimity lives out loud in our relational world in social realms. And the bodhisattva is interested in, understands in this practice of being in the world in a posture of equanimity, that's associated with interdependence, kindness, and harmlessness. And the bodhisattva understands this interdependence as, the understanding is that certainly whatever I do is going to have impact on the whole because we're all one big soup. We're all one big soup we need to taste. We're all part of one vast, skinless, cellular body system, one big nervous system. And what we do has such impact. Eckhart Tolle says, ultimately, you are not a person, but a focal point where the universe is becoming conscious of itself. Ultimately, you are not a person, but a focal point where the universe is becoming conscious of itself. When we think about the bodhisattva or think about ourselves taking our practice out into the world, especially during these times, you can know that there's been many people that's come before you that's kind of put their lives, that you were kind of standing on their shoulders. Many examples of bodhisattvas that are not just the Buddha, but so many others that have come before us. And I'd like to acknowledge a few of those. We have the Lakota people of North America, whose prayer in the community is all our relatives. All our relatives. And we saw the display of this in the the Standing Rock protests against the pipeline. And what was profound about it is that there were 7 principles. Standing Rock was organized around an indigenous template for wise choice from 7 Lakota values. And those values are very similar to the Bodhisattva vows, or the 10 perfections that are taken in the practice. They are prayer, respect, compassion, honesty, generosity, humility, and wisdom. That the whole movement, the social movement of resistance, was organized around those principles. Contemporary bodhisattvas. Another eloquent example is Dr. Martin Luther King. And his Birmingham, this Birmingham letter that he wrote that we've heard a million times, but it really speaks to this understanding that we're interdependent, that kindness is important in the mix. We can't leave our hearts out of the equation. And harmlessness, being harmful can't be part of the mix. And he reads, in a real sense, all life is interrelated. All men, I forgave him for that, all men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. He said, this is the interrelated structure of reality. The interrelated structure of reality. We're interdependent. The structure of reality is that we're interdependent. And Gandhi was also involved in a movement that represented interdependence, kindness, and harmlessness when he says, we but mirror the world. All the tendencies present in the outer world can be found in the world of our body. If we could change ourselves, the tendency in the world would also change. He says, this is the divine mystery supreme. I'm fascinated by the mind that gets that we're not just doing this for our own relief, that this really affects the entire nervous system, that we belong to each other. He says, a wonderful thing it is and a source of our happiness. We need not wait to see what others do. That's Gandhi. And there's Aung San Suu Kyi. There's Nelson Mandela. There's many different movements that are seeking social equanimity, a sense of social balance. We've got the Black Lives Matter movement that was in response to the fact that in 2016, 258 black people were killed by the police. 34% of them were unarmed black men. Acts like that create a social movement to create a sense of balance, social equanimity. And it's so important to keep in mind that there is the need for the movement and also the need for love to be in the mix or the heart to be involved. Martin Luther King says, power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. So the bodhisattva as an archetype, if we so choose, is really understanding that the obstacles that show up in our lives are opportunities to cultivate the heart and mind for the well-being of all, not just for themselves. It's not just their personal obstacle. And the understanding is that when we do that, we're planting seeds of well-being that will have its bloom at some point. Not soon enough, is what I think sometimes. But we're putting the seeds in through our actions. And the practice with the paramis, when we sit on the cushion and we're still with ourselves, would be something like this. And I invite you to close your eyes as I offer these statements. Again, bringing your attention to the stillness in the body, and the movement of the breath. Some of these phrases are inspired by Thomas Merton. May I see the world with quiet eyes. May I offer my care without resistance, knowing I may be met with gratitude, anger, or resistance. May I find the inner resources to truly give, of myself. May I remain in peace and let go of expectations. May I offer love, knowing I don't control the course of life, suffering, or death. May I see my limits and accept my limits with compassion. May I be non-reactive to the changing circumstances of life. May I see the limits of others with compassion. May I offer my best, knowing this may be of great benefit, some benefit, or even no benefit. May I be free from preferences and prejudice. May I offer my prayers without conditions. May I see the world with quiet eyes. So you can open your eyes. Now just close by saying equanimity is not anything we can force ourselves into. And it really is a practice of surrender and deep care for our world, not just ourselves. And acts of personal and social effort towards equanimity is searching for a sense of social harmony and inner well-being. And it is the fruit of our practice. It's the fruit of meditation practice. It's the eighth of the eightfold path. It assumes we are in relationship with all the other 7 paths. And equanimity supports the well-being and aliveness of the other factors. So it's a beautiful, beautiful practice to keep in mind. So I'll end with us as we began with that song. We can all sing it together. I know you learned this song when you were younger. I shall not be moved. I shall not be moveless like a tree planted by the water. I shall not be moved. Thank you for your kind attention.